night series on the Joanie4Jackie project, which was like the mid-90s through the mid-2000s, organized by filmmaker Miranda July. It was like you'll learn a lot more about it in the documentary, but it was a lady-made video distribution project. And we have Vanessa Haroutunian here tonight to show her documentary about the project. And tomorrow we'll be doing kind of a mashup chainletter of films that were part of the project throughout the whole project. So it spans, it's sort of a sampling of films from the different years that the project was going, and we'll also be putting up an installation of a couple of the pieces on loop in the archive tomorrow. And before Vanessa's film, we're going to show a short by Dara Grrrl, which I want to talk a little bit more about.
Dara was one of the founding people of Interference Archive here, and so she and I knew each other earlier than, you know, I've known her, I knew her for a long period of time in different situations, and we ran into each other again here in New York, and she was opening Interference Archive with Josh Fee. Dara subsequently died of cancer quite quickly over the course of a few years, and she was very young. And anyway, the first piece that I made, I'm a filmmaker, and the very first film that I made included Dara's efforts, and this film had been included in the first Joanie4Jackie compilation. So that was really exciting for me, and Dara was such an amusing, intelligent, funny person that she always sort of took me aback. Like I never really knew what to expect from her. So her piece, because my film is called Women's Punk Art Making Party, and did like little pieces. It took place at an art making party that women were invited to at a collective in DC called the Beehive Collective, and then I made individual pieces with people who were at the party, and so Dara was at the party, and I met Dara at that party, and then so she and I did a piece together, and she wanted to do a puppet show, and I didn't really know what that was going to involve, and she told me she wanted to do something called Puppet Girl. Okay, so then I was kind of like, I don't know, I just wasn't really sure what that was going to entail, because Riot Grrrl had really just happened, you know, in DC, and this was sort of like the beginning of a new phase, and there was a lot of fallout, you know, from that period, and there was also a lot of backlash and a lot of, like, you know, bad-mouthing of Riot Grrrl and all sorts of things happening. So I was like, oh God, she's going to do this piece called Puppet Girl. Am I going to, like, actually like this? Or am I going, is it going to be, like, too, I don't know, like, something. So anyway, I went and I just brought my camera, I set it up, and she was, like, in charge of the whole thing. And she did it, and it's really funny. I mean, it just blew my mind how funny it was. Anyway, I have more footage than what's here, but this is what got onto the tape, you know. She had been at Bread and Puppet, which is, you know, a really interesting place for puppeteers way upstate Vermont over the summer that combines politics or radical politics and puppets of large scales and small scales. So she had actually been one of the apprentices there. I had since learned. And I could see how that would have been, because she had it figured out really well. So anyway, so we're going to show that piece before Vanessa's piece.
Do you want to come up and say
Sure.
anything about your film?
I am Vanessa. So I'll make it quick. The movie that we're going to show of mine, it was my senior project at Bard College, which I'm sure quite a few of you have attended that university as well. And basically what it started was I was in a women's experimental history class and kind of stumbled upon Joanie4Jackie as an archive that was just like in a moment of hiatus. So it was just like a bunch of boxes in a room that no one seemed to like know why they were there or like what was going on with it. And I started digging through them and wrote like a thesis paper on it, and then the idea for the movie was presented to me from my senior project advisor. He told me to make a documentary about it, and I didn't want to. I was like, no, I don't want to make a documentary. But I was easily convinced to do otherwise. So this, my movie kind of is putting together the pieces of what I was learning through the paper and video archive. It includes a lot of footage from the archive and a lot of the chain letters. I'd say it's about 50% actual stuff from the archive and 50% interviews. So it'll give you like an intro to what the project is, and also it brought up a lot of questions I had about the state of the project in the time that I made it, which was like 2008, 2009, which was, you know, a good 15 years after it started. So that's that.
In remaking the project and establishing the archive and kind of formalizing the history of the project, it's been really interesting to think about, like, well, how could it be useful now?
They were asked, what do little girls like to do?
Because it's still just as relevant. You know, we were coming out of Riot Grrrl, and we were coming out of, you know, this awesome indie rock scene that was just super amazing and supportive, and zines and all these little subcultures that existed, and that's all still very here.
Do you want to introduce yourself and say what chain letter you were on and maybe how you got involved in the project?
Yeah, my name is Kat Tice, and I was on a later Chainletter. I was on a DVD. So it was like kind of the later side. It was like things called the Giraffinator. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, it was like the very first video I ever made. It was called Speed Freaks Do Bach. I thought that was really a cool name at the time, but I guess it started this.
And how did you like find out about the project or get involved?
I guess it was probably when Gretchen was saying something about seeing like something in bus. Like, I feel like I read about it. It could have been in Bust. It could have been in Sassy. It could have been whatever like cool, rad, underground female media. That was like kind of how I found it. And at the time, like I was initially like, you know, primarily a writer and a poet, and I really wanted to make videos, but I was really afraid of videos. And I had kind of made submitting to the project my goal for my first video. Like I had to make a video, to be in Big Miss Moviola to Joanie4Jackie. So it was like, that was kind of what I made it for.
Because you were doing performances as well. You were reading your poetry, right? In
Yeah.
front of bands that you liked.
Yeah, no, I was deeply involved in the Riot Grrrl scene, or like, I mean, I was like deeply involved. I was like a member, of Riot Grrrl in New York, and I was going to see all the bands, and going to do the shows, and I did like a Riot Grrrl zine, and then, but I was an English major, and like, poetry was like my thing, and but I didn't like anything about the poetry world, but I wanted to be a poet, and and it was just like I just convinced some friends to like let me my first reading I ever did was at a Riot Grrrl convention, and then it was like kind of that kind of connection. Like Riot Grrrl conventions were like having girls reading and girls bands were playing, and it was just like kind of like I convinced some friends to like let me go on tour with them any chance they got to like leave the city. And I would be like their opening act, and I was like, I have something like merch, so I started making like little zines of like my poetry, and so I was doing that, but I always wanted to make a film, and then I made one. So Speed Freaks Du Bach was it was a translation of like this piece from my last scene that I thought just like really sucked as a collage. And I was like, it should be a video, and so that's kind of like how it started.
I've always been interested in this interconnectedness between zine production and this kind of video making, because I think that zines allowed people to experiment in ways that was easier than working with cameras and editing, and at that particular time you didn't have to have as much technology or access to as much technology, but it's funny that you thought, oh, it would be better video than a collage.
Well, it was connected in a kind of like that, just the visualization of like kind of, it was like that moment where I wasn't, because I had, it was, there was there's something about kind of like the self-determination and just making something when no one's expecting you to make something, right? Like, and like at that point, like that was like what I did. Like it was just like I did like live my life. I was a student. I had jobs. I was like, being a person in the world. And then it was like, and then I also had these things I had to make. I was like existing for them, right? And it was like kind of like, and it was like, it was just that no one was asking me to or expecting me to. And, then it became this thing of like, kind of like, okay, well now I have this like, zine thing down, but like one piece is just like not working. And, at that point I had access to a camera because of this job I had, but I really didn't know anything else. It was interesting watching Vanessa's film again, and kind of people kind of bringing up kind of access to kind of like, the lack of access or kind of like inaccessibility to kind of like the skills of filmmaking, and now like it feels so like easy to like make something just out of your phone or whatever. And I that was the hardest thing, but I was like determined. It was like that same volition that like kind of zine making was, and kind of like being in fake bands that lasted like at least a week, like just starting things and being like, okay, like I'm just gonna dive into this. And it's like I have a camera and I don't know what I'm gonna do with it, so I'm gonna point at it, and then have these tapes, and then I'll like figure out how to like get into my computer. And most of my stuff for a long time, I mean, it was all in the original iMovie. Like I wasn't, I was like not, and I had this stance for a long time that like, because like real filmmakers use Final Cut, and I was just like, no, I'm using iMovie, and because I was making really experimental affected stuff, and I just thought that iMovie had better affects if you like messed with them hard enough, which I was using iMovie in all the ways. Like the original iMovie was fantastic for experimental filmmaking or video making, and so I thought that was I was really proud of that for a long time. And then eventually I learned Final Cut and everything went downhill, and I got very self-conscious about everything.
Yeah, well, that's something that I always have found really fascinating about a chain letter as like a single thing to watch, that there is this mix of very like home video camcorder footage and like beautiful 16mm footage, and it also gives you a glimpse, but sometimes tricks you of like who are the like people who like went to school for film, or and then the people who are just like making it because they have something to say, and the difference in medium translating to like a difference in what the like intention of the film is, like in that time period, was interesting to see in the film. But how did you?
Yeah, I mean, I loved some of the early. I remember the early stuff. There was like this one film called "Not Just a Sidekick," and it's just all special effects makeup. Like this woman that worked, I guess, as a special effects makeup person, and made this film about like this like horror film basically, and so it was about this dynamic between this man and this woman, and the woman felt like she was like always sort of like second fiddle or whatever, and eventually like there's some sort of conflict that occurs, and then there's like all sorts of weapons and things like that happen like in the sewers and like these sort of like dark spaces and everything, and it's like these huge gashes and like like hatchets and necks and things like that, appear, and it was this real sort of like reveling, I mean, in the like the B movie aesthetic, something that's like you sort of have to buy into in order to enjoy to begin with, I mean, you have to acknowledge the fact that it's like so unbelievably fake and cheaply done, that at the same time it's the imagination that's behind it that is of value, and it's like, it's hilarious. I mean, I guess some people might not think it's funny, but, I mean, I think these kinds of things are very funny to see, the sort of living out of this fantasy.
Well, I think also, I mean, just what's so interesting, I mean, something I was thinking about just watching this again and like looking at all this work is like thinking about how the lack of, kind of going back to what Ed was saying about kind of like having the lack of funding, and then also kind of the expected like aesthetic of like kind of cheapness, and like being like that was like kind of like this invitation that you could do anything, which is like really liberating, and like and like it gives you access to kind of point at kind of like the veneer of like kind of like the Hollywood kind of sensibilities that we're kind of so accustomed to kind of like experiencing on a regular basis. And something I was thinking about and watching this and like thinking about, like I feel, I mean, just think in revisiting this, like since we've been talking about this like kind of event, is like, God, like I just like I wonder like what it's like to not have that space to make stuff where like no one cares, and like not having the immediacy of like, I mean, when I started making videos, like, like YouTube like was existing, was starting to exist, like you could like post things there. It was like that moment before like there was a possibility of like going viral. So it didn't really matter if like you put this weird recipe up there and like maybe somebody saw it in Singapore and they wrote you a note about it, but like it was like who cares? But it wasn't like that moment, like there's something about this kind of like, filmmaking where, you're just like that immediacy of like kind of like, oh, like I have to connect to 10 other people, because if I don't make this, like no one else will see it. There is no micro cinema. There is no like place for it to go. There is no internet for it to go, you know. I don't know, like I feel, like I wonder, like there's something kind of liberating about being able to kind of question and call out kind of like what we're accustomed to viewing, and also like just like kind of that space to kind of develop your voice in a way that, I don't know, it's lost.
But I mean, isn't the sort of the flip side of that like YouTube is not really a safe space, you know, because it has, maybe this is what you were saying, but
Yeah, no, it's definitely not a safe space now.
yeah.
I mean, it's like, that's like kind of like, that's the immediate way to kind of get seen and get your, I mean, I just watched this interview on Chelsea lately about the woman that made the YouTube video. Now she has the series on Netflix. It's like, I mean, that's like kind of like, there is no kind of like distribution channel that's kind of off to the side to kind of allow for this space to exist. I mean, maybe there is and we don't know about it, and that's great, you know, but I think it's interesting to think about that.
We're just like, since Joanie4Jackie was active and since I made this movie too, it's like, now you're talking about like there was a VHS camera and a Bolex, you know, like in 95 or like in the early 90s when people were making these, and like what you have access to on a general basis is like an iPhone now, right? But there's been one movie that has been widely seen that was made on an iPhone. Just one movie ever. You know, like you can make 1 million iPhone movies and put them on YouTube, and they can be seen by, they can be, what is it called when you're popular? But yeah, they can go viral. I'm just so old, I don't know. It can go viral, but it then, because we're inundated with so much media on the internet now, you forget it in 10 seconds. Like the things that go most viral are like Jimmy Kimmel's like making kids cry. Like that's not movies. That's like just like shit on the internet, you know?
Right. Well, that's what I mean. It's like kind of like we come to this other side where it's like kind of like what is filmmaking. It's sort of like what Vanessa was saying about kind of like the fact that there's so much access to it. Like there's like this fine line of like it's kind of over to this other extreme where it's like, you know, what was so revolutionary about Erica's piece about kind of coming out in that video, like got immediately, you know, like now we can kind of parallel that to like the It Gets Better project, which is super important, but like it's like kind of become a commodified system, like this level of like intimacy and vulnerability that kind of YouTube and Vimeo has created is like kind of turned that aesthetic into like something else that can be turned into something else that's more kind of like commodified. And there's this expectation. What I'm really speaking about is more about the expectation to be seen and like kind of how that affects the work.
Yeah, and I don't think I mean, definitely that film wouldn't have been uploaded on YouTube. You know, like the safety in even knowing a couple of the people, like having had letters from a couple of the people who will probably be watching or film, you know, like to know like a list, because it was just like Miranda would like send out tapes to people. There was actually like just a list of people who would probably see them and maybe to give them to a couple friends, but it was like about creating a community rather than like distribution, which is inherently like anyone has access to or should, and I think there is something safe in the community of people who could have the same vulnerability as you, depending on, you know, whatever they put out there. That wouldn't, that was like wholly supportive and being vulnerable by showing these films to each other.
Oh no, yeah, it was definitely magical.
Yeah.
Like I mean, I'm definitely not negating. I'm like, that's fine. Like I'm just talking about kind of like watching this, being part of this, and then kind of experiencing it and like feeling kind of very like sentimental, and then also being old and cynical now, and then kind of thinking and, you know, being part of the film world now, and kind of just seeing how so much of that has been turned around. But yeah.
Right, I mean, so the one of the defining characteristics of this project is that it took place before the internet was widespread, which is like totally a weird thing to think about now, in that, you know, how the internet has totally subsumed our existence, our daily existences. and our imaginations constantly, every day. And so the idea that it wasn't here to begin with in the first place is so bizarre.
What was also
But-
interesting that, I can't remember her name, the one who has the dress shop. Who is-
Annie?
Annie was saying that, like, she found out about Joanie4Jackie through the internet, through, like, typing in a search, and, like, since there was nothing out there but Joanie4Jackie, like, that popped up, and, like, today if you searched, like, women in film, Joanie4Jackie probably wouldn't, like, be at the top of the list, but in that, like, early internet age, that was, like, something that had popped up, and, like, that was actually sort of weirdly enough for at least one person, like, a way that she got to Joanie4Jackie, and, like, now it's, like, hidden in the explosion of the internet.
Yeah.
I think it also speaks to the affect of, like, a lot of the women that initially submitted onto Joanie4Jackie have gone on to kind of change that. You know, like, you have someone like Sarah Shapiro, who's doing the Unreal show and, like, got nominated for an Emmy, and, you know, I mean, she did an experimental piece that was, like, on the second or third tape, and it's like, there are lots of, you know, it's weird, like, in one of, like, the questionnaires that have been passed around, kind of, like, looking at the aftermath, like, it's like, did people write to you, like, what was the sense of community? And it's like, I went to Portland eventually and spent some time there just to get closer to it, like, even after, I mean, Miranda had already left, but it was just like, there was this, like, amazing space of, like, women making films, and, like, it's just, it's, like, a lot of people know each other, like, I mean, like, I feel like we've gotten to know each other, even if, like, not at that moment, like, and if you didn't immediately get an email, like, after your tape or DVD went out, like, I feel like I've had, because of just, like, kind of just, like, women made things that, you know, ended up on these tapes initially, like, their first work, and then they went off to do bigger, awesome, more awesome things on their own, and so that's kind of been the affect of, like, why, even though it's not where it needs to be yet, like, it's gotten better because so many of those women went out and just, like, started kicking ass.
But I also think that it's like, so if there's like 17 Chainletter tapes, and that means there's 170 lady-made pieces. Like, still the, like, odds of those women becoming even, like, mildly successful are really small. Like, the amount of women whose name people know from those Chainletter tapes are probably like 10, you know, like, in the general public.
Yeah.
Maybe not even, maybe
Yeah.
they just only know Miranda still, you know, like, if we're lucky, Sarah Shapiro too, or, like, people that are in experimental film know quite a few of the others, but it's still, like, only a handful. It's like people know who Kate are and Win are, and that's, like, and maybe Vanessa. It depends on, like, if you know anything about experimental film, then you know a handful of those people, but I
That's
think
true.
that, like, the
Yeah.
project really worked for what it was trying to do in creating, like, an internal community. It did not change the film world.
Oh, no.
Except for Miranda, you know, and that was also, I mean, but that, it wasn't like she was like, I'm using this to become successful, but she's the only person that, like, became really successful. And what she also wanted from this project was to be able to see other movies, to have, like, inspiration, and that happened, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a great idea, I think it's, like, a great thing to be able to see, but, like, like, we're getting closer. Like, there's still, like, 2 women in competition at Sundance, but
It's
there's
slow.
still 2 women in competition at Sundance, you know, like, it's not worse, but, I think, like, the film industry is getting, like, a little bit better, because people are, like,
It's getting a
little bit more
it's going-
aware
it's
of
a
inequality of,
slow-
like, jobs and stuff, but.
It's moving like molasses.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they say that, like, Hollywood is just for men. Okay, I've actually never been to Hollywood. I've never stepped foot in Hollywood. And, I mean, I took I took, like, lots of film theory classes as an undergraduate, and we really studied classical cinema, you know, Hitchcock and, like, you know, Hollywood stuff. And, I mean, it is oriented to a male identity, you know, and it still is, you know, I mean, if you think about the popular television shows that come out of Hollywood, like, you know, Nip Tuck, you know, or like, I mean, who, you know, you could go on and on and on. I mean, it's like, I don't have the interest personally to look at these things, you know, like, it doesn't really, I already know what it is, before I actually look at it. And this is how television and mainstream movie making really is most of the time anyway, right? I mean, so one of the reasons why I live in New York is because New York has options and different people who have different interests and tastes and understandings of what cinema is. And there are different places where you can go that offer it. I mean, like Metrograph or whatever, like they'll show. Not, and Metrograph is not like, or Spectacle, there are other places that actually show work that is challenging and interesting and beyond the standard of Hollywood. And why should we constantly always refer ourselves to that standard? I mean, yes, it's there, of course, it's always going to be there, but it's not going to be necessarily always self-defining, if we don't let it.
But I think, Hollywood is sort of, it doesn't really exist. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's not, but I thought it was something that interesting that Miranda was sort of saying, and I think that and I don't know exactly how this sort of moved through the Joanie4Jackie project, but I mean, I think that at the time it was it was kind of it seemed like a celebration of an alternative, a kind of an avant-garde that was going to be more women-centric. But listening to her talk, though, is I don't think that she really thought this, and I don't even think she really thought this about her own career. I don't think that, because at the time I was well, she's a video artist, but I think that somehow she always understood that she was still moving towards something that was going to challenge dominant forms of production, and that she was because she's the one that talks about well, you make these short films on your way to making long films. And that this is that's sort of the career trajectory, and that's kind of the trajectory of experimental film or short film or something like that, is that it is kind of this transient thing that I think that she was kind of trying to push people through, rather than developing something that was going to be sort of a static space that was going to always be there, that might change forms as time goes by. But I think she was actually kind of almost it was a project that was going to come to an end because you weren't going to need it at some point. And maybe we've gotten to that point where maybe when women come out, because I think that things have changed. I mean, I don't there are lots of women working in television, and there's lots of women working in film. They might not need those kinds of spaces to go get a job in TV, or become a television writer, or become a producer on a show or something like that, because they can just more quickly sort of go and sort of do those kinds of things. I don't know.
There's so much in there. It's still hard, but at the same time, it's interesting what you're saying about kind of the idea, and speaking to what she said, the idea would this space still be necessary? I am part of this group called the Film Fatales, and it's the shorts division. It's kind of it used to be just a features division, and now it's just the shorts. I'm part of the shorts chapter, and it's all these. It's the space support group for women in film. And, it's kind of very steeped in kind of a lot of Riot Grrrl morals. And almost every meeting we have, it's I'm almost 40, and there's a lot of women in their 20s, and they're, on their third and fourth short films. And we always start off the meeting with the question about is it really necessary for us to exist? And I'm are you guys crazy? And I'm always I can't even believe that you guys don't even know how much because they've only worked for female producers. They're getting mentorship immediately, and it's they are they're ready to make their features, and I'm just wow, you guys don't even know that. So I ask this question all the time about kind of how, what is that, how did you get, how did you get to have that feeling, you know?
Mm.
Because it is still super hard, and like it does come down to, I mean, the big question is, it really comes down to capital, and like kind of like having a narrative that feels accessible enough to be invested in. And then it becomes this whole thing about like, what kind of filmmaker do you want to make? Like, do you need to make something that needs that level of capital to produce and hire people? And like, I mean, we're still like in a world where it's really terrifying to like see a woman be in that place of power. And I think that that's kind of like what Joanie4Jackie and like a lot of like what Miranda really, I think, going back to what you're saying, I do agree with, is like, I think that she always had a vision of, she wanted to be seen as somebody, not like in a capitalist sense, but she wanted to be seen as someone with a vision. And that was not something that she was seeing a lot of women, you know, demanding of themselves or each other. And as an artist, I think that's kind of what she wanted to kind of create a militia of. Because in Hollywood, it's very terrifying. There are lots of women that are producers and are off to the side, but being the woman in the middle, the director, is like, that's still like a terrifying place to be. And I think that that's why she wants to see more people on the, on the lineup with her. And, as we all do. But then there's this other thing, is like kind of like being an experimental filmmaker, which is a very different like kind of like relationship to kind of like the world of film and video, and it's a different kind of community, and it's more theory based, and it's more wrapped up with the academy, and kind of more like, another world. Like, it's not the same thing. And she also, her practice traversed that, and like, and really kind of, which always like personally inspired me as like a writer and like an artist and a filmmaker that wants to like do all those things, is like the level of hybridity in her work is so female, but so unknown and so terrifying, because there's so many, like the art world, like the system of Hollywood, all of it is like kind of compartmentalized into these institutional paradigms of what works and what we know, like where the money has to go and who we have to support. And when you make work and you kind of traverse all these realms, you're hard to figure out, and like, I think that's what she was trying to do as well.
I think, yeah, I mean, the idea of the project itself, yeah, like the distribution, it being a distribution project, right? That's how I describe it. But it is true that it only went to like a certain number of people, and it really wasn't like, I don't know, like shown on satellite or whatever. So it was probably more of I think about audience when I think about this project, and I think about community too, and how these things overlap, these areas overlap, from like people who might buy a ticket to go see a film, or invest in making a film or whatever, produce a film because they're interested in the project or the maker, but then there's also, who do you make your work for? Do you make it for yourself, or do you make it for, I don't know, like your father, or like you make it for, somebody who's like gonna make you a lot of money, or do you make it for your friends, or do you make it for like some imaginary person, right? And that's what the whole network of Joanie4Jackie was not existing before it was instigated through the connections of like Riot Grrrl conventions and zine production and camcorders, cheaper technology and things like that too. So this was like a grassroots kind of development of an audience that was actually oppositional, I think, to like straight up Hollywood and that kind of thing.
I agree with that. I think that it inherently, and I think that what this project and kind of like people that have kind of produced in, you know, in different realms of film and video. Like, I think that the soul of it is really kind of telling the story that you need to tell. And different stories have different containers. And I think that kind of is like kind of being able to negotiate, like having the volition, the determination to kind of realize that your story is so important to tell that you are going to figure out how to make it by any means necessary is like really what I think the project is about, and that the audience is there that needs to hear it. And I think that besides kind of empowering women and girls to find that in themselves to make the thing, no matter what they have to do to learn how to make it, also kind of realizing that there was an audience of women and girls that needed to hear it in all different kind of parameters of however they take in media. And I think we're still seeing the effects of that and that volition.
Do we want to open up to the audience for questions or something else to say?
I was curious, I'm sorry if I missed this, but did you come across any examples of people screening copies of the different issues that came out, you know, of like a VHS tape screening at a university or somewhere else?
So Miranda did tour with the Chainletters for a little while, like in the 90s. So she would screen them at universities in like a very Riot Grrrl 90s venue kind of way. And then there have been a couple shows over the years, like the show at Yerba Buena, and the
There was the one that like Jackie Goss and everyone like paired a piece from Joanie4Jackie with like a piece of their own. That was a couple of
yeah. There's been like a couple of retrospectives that have happened over the few years that those things never showed an entire Chainletter tape. An entire Chainletter tape is amazing and really difficult to sit through because it's like 2 hours of like amazing stuff, but it's hard. Like it's hard. So it's rare that you actually like get a screening of a full. And I don't know that Miranda actually did screen a full Chainletter tape. This is like hearsay now. You know, this is like, oh, someone told me that once in Seattle in '97 there was a full Chainletter tape screen, but like I can't prove that, of course. But there's been like bits and pieces. I've done like compilations or helped other people with compilations, kind of like a best of, but a best of not being like we're only going to screen like the 10 most well-known women now. It would be like we would show like Erica Hill's full piece and this movie that we all of us at Bard love called Horror Movie, which is not that same horror movie, but it's like these two 17-year-old girls made a like fake like a Scream remake in North Carolina. That was amazing. Like we would just like curate like and would make like a kind of like full like maybe like an hour and a half. But VHS used to be like 2 to 6 hours depending on which way you put that little button. So there have been some screenings, but not in a long time as far as I know.
There are endless possibilities, though.
But they could also be happening like in people's living rooms. Like those women that got those original tapes probably screened them in their living rooms, like in the 90s and early 2000s, I would imagine, with their friends. I think that was kind of how it went.
Yeah. I mean, we just like put ours together by who we could get in contact with. And we're still getting in contact with people who participated. So it's like, there's so many people who participated.
Yeah. And like if anybody like didn't have an email address like in the beginning.
I know,
too.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
Mine, I don't use mine anymore, but that's on the, that I used at the time. So mine was a Hotmail. I've since abandoned.
Does anybody else have questions? Conversation points or thoughts, feelings?
Well, I think it's good. Thanks everyone for participating and thanks for coming. And tomorrow we'll be screening, like Mary was saying, sort of a compilation of films from different Chainletters of women who we reached out to, and we're excited to show their films. So come back tomorrow for that.
Can I make one closing statement?
Yeah.
If any of you guys work in film and you have the option to hire a man or a woman and they're equally as qualified, hire the woman. That's how we change the problem. I didn't make that up myself. I heard someone else say it, but that's how you kind of like change there's a
Pretty basic.
it's kind of easy, like, if the best DP available to you is a man, by all means hire them, but if there are two candidates who are equal and one person's a woman and one person's
I
a
don't
man,
even want to
just hire
talk
women.
about the election.
Don't.
I purposely avoided that.
Wasn't thinking about it for 2 hours straight.
I know.
You ruined it. Now I can-
Yeah.
Where are these films available if they are at all?
So-
For anyone who would want to?
Well, they're not really anymore. So,
We have a bunch here,
right.
so you can come here.
They're not like a bill. So what happened is that in two.
In what form?
We have a viewer, you can watch it here.
Yes.
Yeah. But the
Till January
full archive
15th, yeah.
existed at BARD.
right. So the archive used to be at BARD of everything that existed from it, unless there was tape that were sent out that people had in their own possession in the zines. But the archive was given away to an actual museum last year, and they're like about to announce where it is. Well, we've been like,
the museum is
What?
going to?
what?
They didn't tell you the museum.
No, we know, but
We
like they're
can't
about.
tell you.
We can't tell you. It's
They're
kind of
revealing, it's gonna be a big reveal.
You know, it's like when someone gets a job and we all know about it, but you can't talk about it because it's like at the new museum or something. So the archive itself is going to be like publicly accessible at some. I
At
mean,
that point,
yeah, but
at that place.
you can find out about them online. Like people have them. You
Or
know, like
through
have
us.
the tapes. Yeah, or through us. I had both. We all.
It's kind
saved
of
our
like a
pages.
bootleg project,
Yeah.
too, if you think about it. That's how I'm approaching it.
Yeah, but like there's a problem with just having public screenings of them now because when someone gave permission to have something be put on a tape in 1995,
Yeah.
there's a difference between that verbal permission or like that postal service permission between that person and Miranda, and there's a difference between that and publicly screening those things
That's true.
now, which is just like, has been problematic over the years, where like someone gave a piece to submit on the Chainletter, 20 years ago, and then it gets screened at like a museum as part of the collection, and that person's like, I did not tell you you could show my first movie ever, like at that museum, because like rights, like the times have changed and people don't
You
like
have
want
to ask
yeah,
permission.
consent.
And so we actually have to reach out and contact the filmmakers
Yeah.
and figure out where they are and who they are. And sometimes we can find them on Facebook, and sometimes we find them through other ways, or we just know them, like what Kat was saying.
Yeah.
But, but we actually have it here pretty much to look at, almost, and we're still gaining permission as we go. So we'll be adding to what is available to be seen here, until January. Yeah, it's a lot of movies. I don't know, over like 200.
Yeah, so there were 19 Chainletter tapes, including the DVDs. They each had 10 pieces on them. And then there was 3 co-star tapes, which were the curated videos. One was curated by Miranda, one was curated by Astro Superac, and one was curated by Rita Gonzalez. And those had like about 6 pieces on them. And that's it. That's what like the actual archive consists of. We had been trying to make another Chainletter at BARD for like 6 years of like we would just like find submissions that had never been nobody ever responded to the letter, or like someone was like, they were like, yeah, we're gonna make another tape real soon, and then that letter had been written like 5 years ago, and I don't think we could never get the damn dual layer DVD to burn right or something. So there's we wanted to make it a perfect 20.
One of the filmmakers is here. I forgot to mention. So Rohisha Hamilton Metcalf is here. She's one of the filmmakers that we'll be showing tomorrow night as well. So, and her piece is called La Blanchisseuse. So, and that's one of the later ones. And a New York filmmaker who we came across by chance as well. So, there's a network that's out there underneath as well. So, and I don't know if you want to say anything about your experience with the whole project.
I mean, it's like, you know, when you said, how did you find out, I just think I read about it too, and it just, like, by that time, I think that was the first Chainletter, I think it was 2005, and that was more of a thing by that time, so I thought, great, I'd love to, you know, give something for that, and it was, yeah,
Yeah.
that's all.
I think, you know, when you captured, what's the woman who did, Transiltown?
Myra Pachi.
Myra Pachi. And, yeah, I mean, it's just like this idea that, you know, oh, somebody's actually interested, you know, like, in what I'm doing. And, or like, there's an audience out there, you know, for this. So I'm going to, you know, engage with that audience, and I'm going to make something happen, you know, make that connection, you know. And I mean, the variety of work that's in the Joanie4Jackie collection is really astounding. So, and of course, you know, there's so many different things that you can do with film and video, you know, I mean, you don't necessarily have to make a narrative, you know, or you don't necessarily have to make, you know, like a self-portrait or whatever, you know. So and I think it shows like a really good range of what's possible.
Definitely.
Great.